If you've spent any time at all in online spaces talking about Mormonism, Reddit, Facebook, you name it, you've probably had that feeling like you need a secret decoder ring. There's this whole new vocabulary that's popped up to describe people's relationship with the church, and honestly, it can be super confusing. So today, we're going to crack that code. I mean, have you seen these acronyms floating around? TBM, Pimo, progmo. What on earth do they even mean? Well, they're not just random letters, believe me. They're actually shorthand for really complicated, really personal journeys. And once you know what to look for, you start seeing them absolutely everywhere.
So think of this as your field guide. We're going to look at where these terms came from, what they really mean for the people using them, and why they become so essential for understanding the huge range of experiences people are having with their faith today.
But first, to really get why this new language was even needed, we've got to go back in time a little bit. Because not that long ago, things were seen in much, much simpler terms. It was all pretty black and white.
This quote from someone looking back just nails it. People were either active or inactive. That was it. The lines in the sand were crystal clear. You were either all in or you were out. There wasn't really any room for a middle ground.
And this is basically what that world looked like. You had two camps. You were either active, meaning you were there every Sunday doing all the things, or you were inactive, meaning you'd kind of drifted off. For decades, that simple system was enough. But oh boy, was that about to change.
And then the internet happened, right? All of a sudden, people had these anonymous places where they could share things they'd never say out loud, experiences that just did not fit neatly into those active or inactive boxes. A whole new map was needed, and one single term basically redrew the entire thing. And that term, the real game changer, is Pimo. It stands for physically in, mentally out. This one little acronym gave a voice to this huge shared experience, that feeling of sitting in the pew every single week, even though your heart and your mind have already left the building. It just perfectly captured this modern struggle for thousands of people.
So let's break that down. What does being a Pimo actually feel like? Well, it's someone who, for really personal reasons, maybe it's their spouse, their parents, their entire social circle, they just keep going, they keep participating, even though they don't believe anymore. You can imagine the kind of conflict that creates inside a person. And that is exactly why those online forums became such a lifeline. It was a place to find people who got it.
But Pimo was really just the beginning. It kind of opened the floodgates, and this whole spectrum of new labels came pouring out. So let's take a quick tour through some of the other key terms you'll run into in this new landscape.
First up, let's talk about the labels for people who have left the church completely. These are often folks who now have a pretty critical perspective on the institution they've walked away from.
The most common one you're going to see here is ex-Mo. It's pretty straightforward, right? It's just shorthand for ex-Mormon. It has become the go-to term for someone who has made a clear and public break with the faith.
Okay, so that's people who are out. But what about those who stay but want to see things change? This next category is for members who are still active, but they're pushing the boundaries, They're trying to make reforms from the inside.
And the key term here is progmo, which is short for progressive Mormon. This describes someone who still believes, but they're also advocating for social progress on big issues, things like LGBTQ inclusion or more equality for women in the church. They're trying to bridge their faith with modern values.
All right, now let's flip to the other side of the coin. Of course, there are also labels for people who fully embrace the traditional Orthodox version of the faith.
For this group, the acronym you'll hear all the time is TBM. It can mean True Believing Mormon or True Blue Mormon. Either way, it's describing your classic all-in member, someone who is fully devout and completely aligned with the church's leadership and teachings.
But within that conservative space, a more specific and frankly pretty controversial online movement has shown up. And one source describes their tone with some really strong words, saying it's, quote, unapologetically militant, combative, and nationalistic. This is referring to a group known as Desnat.
So let's unpack this a bit because there are two very different ways people see this group. Desnat, it's short for Deseret Nation, is an online movement. From their perspective, they are the defenders of the faith. They see themselves as protecting the church from progressive ideas they think are dangerous. But then you have the critics, and this includes plenty of other church members who see it very differently. They see Desnat as extremist, exclusionary, and promoting some really toxic rhetoric online.
Whew, okay. That's a lot of acronyms, I know. So let's just pause for a second and put it all together. You've got your ex-Mo who's out, your progmo who's in but pushing for change, your TBM, who's the traditional believer, and of course the Pimo, stuck in that complicated space right in the middle. These four pretty much give you the main landmarks on this new map.
All right, so we've defined all the terms, but you might be thinking, so what? Why does any of this internet slang actually matter? Well, it matters because it's a signal of something much, much bigger that's happening with faith and community. It all boils down to this. That old world of just two choices, active or inactive, it's just gone. It's totally insufficient. It's been replaced by this messy, complicated, and let's be honest, much more real spectrum of belief and doubt and identity.
And that is why these labels are so important. They are not just trendy words. Think of them more like maps. Each acronym, each term, is an attempt to chart a deeply personal, often painful, and incredibly complex journey that a real person is on with their faith.
And maybe this is the real goal. As one writer put it, understanding all this can hopefully lead to a deeper empathy for those whose paths differ from their own. When we learn the language, we're not just learning definitions. We're getting a small window into someone else's life, and that's powerful.
So if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. Language is alive. It has to evolve when our reality changes. When our old words can't hold our new experiences, we have to invent new ones. And this whole vocabulary is a perfect example of language sprinting to catch up with life. But that leaves us with one last really big question to chew on. Does creating all these labels, giving a name to every different experience, actually lead to more understanding and empathy? Or does it just create new tribes, new ways to divide ourselves, and end up building even higher walls between us? That's the real question worth thinking about.